Greetings, sisters and brothers. This is Milton Alimadi. Hope everybody's doing well. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please, of course, subscribe. Let others know about my channel. I want to try to post much more consistently. There's so many serious issues to discuss. And if you're watching on Patreon, same thing. Please subscribe. Please support my Patreon channel as well. And of course, it's Patreon/African History Club. And also my other social media accounts. For X, it is @Alimadi. And for IG, it's @Milton Alimadi. So a couple of folks have asked me to speak on the alliance of the Sahel states, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. So I want to lay out a broader context first, because that will then give us a better understanding of the importance of what these three countries are trying to accomplish. So basically, in Africa, we never really had an end to colonialism, right? Colonialism basically just transformed and took on a different format, a different form. Some people have called it Neocolonialism, dependency, economic dependency, which of course translates to political dependency as well. So what do I mean by that? I mean that today in 2025, we do not have a single industrialized African country. Just think about that. When the technology is now widely available. And it's not by accident that the countries that tend to be the wealthiest with the highest standard of living are the ones that are industrialized. And these are the countries that uses Africa's resources to build wealth and prosperity in their own countries. Remember, what was the original colonial project after slavery, old school, old-fashioned slavery ended? And then what succeeded that was, of course, colonialism. So what was that agenda? In 1884-85, when the European powers met at the Berlin Conference, what did they do? They apportioned land for themselves on the African continent. They divided up the continent. They secured the land, and by securing the land, they secured control over Africans and subjugated their labor, similar to the way labor was subjugated during slavery. But it was slightly less harsh. They were not confined on slave plantations, but they still had to come and work on the land that previously belonged to them, that was now taken over by the Europeans, particularly in countries like Kenya, in South Africa, in Algeria. In countries where they maintain control of their land largely, like in Ghana, they were still subjugated, because whatever they produced, and eventually it became the major commodity in Ghana, was cocoa, they had only one buyer, which was the colonial state, you see? So that was another form of subjugation as well. So that's the structure they set up at the Berlin Conference. Africans were colonized, and they were confined to producing raw materials. The raw materials were then shipped, or they called it primary products as well, shipped to Europe, which had already industrialized. They were turned into manufactured products, which they then brought back to Africa at exorbitantly inflated prices, and Africans were compelled to buy the manufacture. That's what was set up in 1884-85. What are the conditions today? 100% identical. Every African country imports the manufactured products that they consume, whether it's automobiles, whether it's electronic equipment, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's aircraft, you name it. It gets even ridiculous in the sense that even products they can produce in Africa, they import. They import food. In many countries, they even import bottled water. That's how preposterous it is. Total economic dominance over Africa. So that you have a situation where you have the world's richest continent in terms of resource endowment, natural resource endowment, minerals, land, water, sunlight, hydroelectric energy potential, and yet you have the most impoverished people at the same time. That is the contradiction that was set up in 1884-85. That is the situation that applies today. So these countries, the alliance of the Sahel states, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they are trying to change that neo-colonial arrangement so that they can use their products to refine it domestically within their own countries, add value to it, and use the raw materials to manufacture within their countries, not selling it for cheap to Europe and then buying the manufactured products at a very dear price. That basically is the struggle in those countries. It's a struggle that should be emulated by every African country. Why should we be selling our minerals, natural resources for cheap and buying products that they would not be able to produce without our resources? And we buy it very dearly at a very exorbitant price. That is the formula for perpetual slavery. So in these countries, we have these military leaders who have intervened. And, you know, we've had many terrible military coups in African countries. We have men in uniform that have destroyed African countries. We have Mobutu. We have Siad Barre. All these notorious names. We have Bokassa. We have today, right in Uganda, you know, sometimes he wears his uniform, sometimes he pretends in civilian outfit. General Yoweri Museveni. So that is why sometimes people, when they hear military, they tune out immediately. And which, by the way, is very hypocritical, because it's not as if the men in suits have been so much better for Africa as well. You know, in fact, as you all know, one of the most admired and successful leaders on the African continent was, of course, Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso. And in fact, now you have Ibrahim Traore, who, of course, is trying to rekindle the spirit of Thomas Sankara. The same way with Assimi Goïta in Mali, trying to also capture that Sankara spirit. Same way in Niger. The ruler in Niger is a bit older generation, but he's supported by young people. That is Abdourahmane Tiani in Niger. So these are things that the Alliance of Sahel states are trying to do, because, as you know, with French neocolonialism, it was particularly much more oppressive and all-encompassing relative to other colonial experiences on the African continent. So, for example, in the case of France, they maintained military garrisons in their former colonies to exercise total political as well as economic domination. And they also dominated the West African countries by having virtual control, absolute control over their currency, the CFA. At one time, they had to maintain a 50% balance of their reserves. 50% was maintained in the French treasury, meaning that France had controlled and managed their reserve account monies. And France would invest this money. If it made money, well and good. If it lost, too bad. You know, how can you run your own country when somebody else is managing your reserves. So that was the very dominating type of neo-colonial relationship that France had with its former colonies. And that is what we're now seeing, that breakup that never happened in the 1960s, of course, because France was very vicious. Anytime any of the new leaders that emerged in Africa tried to break away from this French dominance, they would be eliminated, right? They would be overthrown, they would be killed, they would be replaced with French puppets, leaders that France is able to totally dominate. And that is why when Thomas Sankara came to power in 1983 and advocated for nationalism, for Pan-Africanism, for African control, African cooperation, African liberation, he said, let's consume what we produce and let's produce what we consume. France saw him as a particular danger and worked with the leader of the neo-colonial state of Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire, the late Félix Houphouët-Boigny, to make sure that Sankara was eliminated. And of course they used Blaise Compaoré, who was Sankara's deputy. And that transformation that had started in Burkina Faso was brought to a very tragic end. And Compaoré stayed on in power for 27 years until he himself was overthrown. In the short period that he was in power, what he was amazingly able to accomplish many achievements. For example, Burkina Faso became food self-sufficient within 3 years. He expanded healthcare to the rural areas and throughout the country. He expanded literacy and education. He empowered women, who were more than 50% of the population. He taught people how to aggressively fight back against desertification by planting trees. They ended up planting more than 10 million trees. He proved that even with limited resources, Africans could accomplish much with the correct type of leadership, not the neo-colonial type of leadership that we have in most African countries, where we are dependent either on the West or on China for everything that is accomplished domestically in our countries. So obviously, even though Sankara was brutally assassinated in 1987, Africans did not forget what he was trying to accomplish. And that is why ultimately, when Assimi Goïta came to power in Mali in 2020, and then in 2022 we have Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, and in Niger we have Tiana in 2023. So these leaders also have realized the power of working collaboratively. Because remember, when China came to power in July of 2023, the ECOWAS, the regional organization of West African states, France was speaking through ECOWAS, right? So France was behind the corner, and ECOWAS was giving articulation to what France was actually saying, and gave an ultimatum to the new leadership in Niger, that if they did not surrender power in 2 weeks and restored Bassoum back to office, Bassoum who had been overthrown, there would be a military intervention by ECOWAS. So what did these three countries do? They announced a joint pact between Mali, between Burkina Faso and Niger, and said any military attack on any single one of them would be seen as an attack on all three of them, and that they would jointly, militarily resist such an invasion. Needless to say, that intervention never occurred. and that intervention is not going to occur. And this is the power of unity and collective exercise. And I dare say there would not be any outside intervention in African countries if we had a United States of Africa. Correct? Number one. Number two, we would be able to transform the African continent economically within a very short period. Because part of the problem that we have is that African countries individually are weak. They cannot dictate the price that they get, the revenue that they earn. Forget about using it domestically to manufacture products. Even when you want to sell it internationally, we have no control over the price. We're not that strong. That is what Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are trying to change, that relationship. But in the past, if you try to demand a much more equitable price, a fairer price, what was their solution? They kill you. That is the experience we've seen throughout Africa. What was Patrice Lumumba trying to do in Congo in 1960 after independence? He wanted a better price, a better percentage of the revenue from the copper produced in the Katanga region. So what did imperialism do? They encouraged the traitor Moise Tshombe to secede, to say Katanga is now independent of the rest of the Congo. And then they empowered Mobutu to overthrow Patrice Lumumba and then brutally murdered him in January 1961. So the alliance of Sahel states, the leaders of Mali, of Burkina Faso and Niger, they don't want what happened to Patrice Lumumba to happen to them as well. They don't want what happened to Thomas Sankara to happen to them as well. And that is why they've come together to form this alliance, and they're planning, strategizing, and executing joint security arrangements to protect their governments, but also to encounter the insurgency that is causing a lot of havoc, a lot of deaths, a lot of destruction in these Sahel states as well. On a very practical basis, they've intervened in the economy. So, for example, in Burkina Faso, now they're insisting that the gold should be refined domestically, so that when they sell it, when they sell the gold, it's sold as refined gold, and they get a lot more revenue out of that. And then they've now started introducing very basic factories in industries, because they see the importance of industrialization, and that's what they're embarking on. Similarly, in Niger, we saw that they put a freeze on the sale of uranium, which was being exploited by France. Just think about it this way. Niger is one of the countries that has the lowest per capita income in the world, while France has a very high living standard. All of this is subsidized by cheap uranium from Niger. There's no reason why Niger should be impoverished and the people of France enjoy a high standard of living. That is what they're trying to change by this intervention. We saw very recently in Mali, they intervened in the gold industry that is dominated by the huge Canadian company, Barrick Gold. It's a huge factory. The resources over $1 billion that is currently being mined right now. And they've intervened. They want a better arrangement, regardless of the old so-called contracts that were obtained with the corrupt arrangements with previous leaders. You know, many of our corrupt previous leaders, they take a few millions of dollars into their personal bank account, and then they sign these contracts that are never even publicized. They're kept as secret, you know, so-called state secrets. How can resources that belong to the entire country be subjected to state secrets? Absolute nonsense. So I think these are the main issues that are being addressed in the alliance of Sahel states. And their type of intervention is now affecting and influencing countries that are not under military rule. And a good example is Senegal under Bassirou Faye, who also asked France to leave, just like all these countries did. They kicked out the French military garrisons. Senegal, which used to be a very reliable neo-colonial state, is now becoming much more assertive under this new young leadership. In addition to kicking out the France, they are now also talking about using Senegal's resources to produce domestically, and any of the investors who are coming in, they're insisting that they build the factories in Senegal so that we can create high-skilled jobs within Senegal and then produce the manufacturers and sell it to other African countries and the rest of the world. So, sisters and brothers, this is my presentation regarding the Alliance of Sahel States, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Thank you for supporting. Please do support, as I said, my Patreon, which is Patreon/African History Club. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe and support my YouTube channel as well. Peace and blessings. A luta continua. See you soon.